Welcome back. Another company that has been the talk of the town over the last few days has been Vodafone Idea, and its hopes of getting relief in the AGR dues have hit a wall, with the government reiterating that no waiver request can be entertained in light of the Supreme Court's final judgment. Ashmit is joining in with more on this.
Well, clearly, the government, Telecom Minister Aditya Sindhya, in the statements that he's given, he's clarified that, look, the Supreme Court has ruled on the matter. That is the end of it, that there's nothing on his table that will allow him to go ahead and to grant AGR relief. And mind you, this is consistent with what CNBC-TV18 has been reporting. CNBC-TV18 was the first to report where a submission had gone from Vodafone Idea to the Department of Telecom, asking for some relief, asking for a waiver of the interest and penalty dues of the AGR. However, at the time itself, in response to the letter, DOT had clarified that, look, in light of the Supreme Court judgment, our hands are tied. We cannot consider this relief. Subsequently, we had Vodafone Idea moving the Supreme Court. And there again, for a second time in tow, the DOT again, by way of the Solicitor General, clarified once again that our view is clear, that the Supreme Court judgment makes the position clear. There is no room that is available for grant of relief. And on the basis of that, we had understood that the Apex Court went ahead. It had dismissed the application altogether for grant of waiver. It had clarified that, look, it is shocking that this petition is being filed despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already given the AGR judgment, that this petition is entirely misconceived. And on the back of that, even that petition being dismissed. So that dismissal of that petition by Vodafone Idea now being cited by the Telecom Minister Aditya Sindhya, where he's clarifying that, look, the Supreme Court has had the final word. Our hands are tied. No room available, nothing on my table to grant any further AGR relief on the waiver front to Vodafone Idea.
Ashmit, thank you very much for that. So clear communication coming in from the Telecom Minister Aditya Sindhya saying that the Indian government will not provide any sort of relief on the AGR front. That said, the company still continues to keep out hope, because yesterday there was a conference call, and in the conference call, the company said that our view is the government can see no reason why the government should be constrained if it decides to offer relief. So the question is, what's the way forward now for Vodafone Idea? We have with us HP Ranina, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, Shiju PV, Managing Partner of IndiaLaw LLP, and Anupam Sanghi, TMT lawyer. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining in. Mr. Ranina, we've been discussing about what next for Vodafone Idea. Now it seems amply clear that the government is not in a position to help. Their hands are tied. What do you think will be the way forward now for Vodafone Idea and how this plays out?
Yeah, I mean, is that for me?
Yes, sir. Mr. Ranina, sir,
okay.
This is for you. Your opening comments.
See, the government has its own constraints. I don't think you can pressurize the government to take any call. Supreme Court has said that's an executive decision. They will not interfere with it. The government is free either to give or not to give. Now it's entirely the government's decision. Government says, look, we have already given you the relief. Why don't you ask your own promoters, your own shareholders, the equity shareholders, to put in more money? And I think it's a fair judgment, because the reason being that you can't use taxpayers' money to go on, helping the private sector. To some extent, the government has got almost 49% of the equity in these telecom companies. They can't go beyond that, otherwise they become subsidiaries of the government of India. So you can't go on expecting the government to bail them out every time they have a problem. They have to find their own resources. And I think the minister is right. Nothing can be done. It's a government's decision. You can't tell them what to do. It's entirely their choice. If Vodafone wants to act, they have to get their own promoters involved, their own equity shareholders in UK or Netherlands, wherever they are, and ask them to invest more money. That's how it should be. You can't keep on expecting the government to put in more money, which is actually the taxpayers' money.
So what you're saying is that now the onus lies on the promoters, the Vodafone Idea Group, the Birla Group and Vodafone UK, or the existing shareholders, or perhaps even the banks, if they have to provide any sort of relief. But sir, we've heard, Mr. Kumar Mangalam Birla himself saying that in a way the company will have to shut shop, head to insolvency. So barring any support, money getting infused from the promoters or from the shareholders, and bank debt also has been lacking now for a very long time. Do you think insolvency is the next logical step? And who takes them? Because in this case, banks have limited exposure, I believe just 2,300 crore rupees. So they may not be forcing the government, the company to head into insolvency. Will it be the government because they are the single largest shareholder, or do you think the Indian promoter will take the company into insolvency?
Well, that's what they say, that they'll take the company into insolvency. That may be just a way of, pressurizing the government. But in the past also they've been doing that. So I think they have to put their own house in order. They have to somehow raise resources. And if they cannot expand, maybe they just do go ahead with what they have currently. But to say that if you don't give us money, we'll go into liquidation, we'll have insolvency, well, that's an unintended consequence. They will have to face it. But that's what the promoters themselves will lose a lot of money. So again, in the promoters group, Indian promoters group, they can put money. They have other resources. They have other companies which can generate the funds. So you have to be self-sufficient. You can't just go on, expecting others to bail you out.
The company needs to be self-sufficient. Shiju, weigh in with your thoughts. What next for Vodafone Idea? Is insolvency the next step to your mind? Or do you think relief is still possible because of that stray observation made by, the Supreme Court? It was not a part of the formal judgment, but they did make an observation that if the government wants to provide relief, they can. They will not, the Supreme Court will not hold them back.
The problem is not just a Vodafone issue here. See, Indian telecom sector is at an inflection point. See, at one point of time, we had around 10 companies in the telecom sector. Now we are coming down to 2 players. So the question for the government, for the executive is that whether a duopoly is good for Indian digital infrastructure space, because the whole digital infrastructure, the fundamental is telecom. So whether a duopoly is in the interest of the public. That's the first question. It is not limited to a Vodafone issue. It is an overall sectoral and structural issue faced by the telecom sector. Now, next course of action, whether IBC insolvency is the appropriate relief, appropriate method. See, we have seen the case of Reliance, Arcom, and also earlier Aircel, Videocon, and etc. and all. Insolvency proceeding failed. The reason is that the spectrum is not an asset. See, when a company goes into insolvency, the main question is that what are the assets of the company? But unfortunately, spectrum is not an asset of the company, but it's only a licensee. And when there is no certainty that the spectrum license will continue post resolution, no serious bidder will come and bid. And it has been the stand of DOT that unless you pay the full AGR due, we will not continue with the license. So that is the fundamental reason insolvency proceeding fails in telecom sector. So overall sectoral reform is required. Also this conflict between IBC and also the AGR dues, claiming priority on the AGR due, that also has to be resolved. And it has been litigated for quite some time. And a policy making through a litigation is not an appropriate method. So what is the need of the hour is an executive action. And that executive action is really missing.
That's an interesting point, that insolvency fails in the case of telecom companies like we've seen in the past, because spectrum and AGR, they're not hard assets which can be sold. Companies, the telcos, only have a right to use them. They're licensees. And therefore, it's not that you can sell them and generate money to repay. Anupam, so what happens, right? I mean, the company owes the government a lot of money, I think 1.8, 1.9 lakh crore in terms of AGR and spectrum dues. Does that have to be written off? Let's assume that we don't get an executive order. Right? There is no resolution package that comes out, at least for now. If the company heads into insolvency, does the AGR spectrum dues of the government have to be completely written off?
Well, the answer is not easy, for anybody to write off such a huge debt. But having said that, the mess has been created by DOT in the first place, by having such a broad, inclusive definition of average gross revenue, including both licensed and unlicensed activities. And this more than 2 decades old case was resolved by the Supreme Court in 2019. So, and Supreme Court has further, had there was a double whammy when Supreme Court upheld the interpretation of the DOT and did not go by the interpretation and the judgment of the TDSAT, which is the specialized tribunal. And TDSAT had clearly said that TRAI has not even given a proper consultation while defining, gross revenue. So the whole question boiled down to a technical issue that, what can be included in the gross revenue, what cannot be, and, whether the accounting standards were properly used. And, Supreme Court not going by, the tribunal's view has had such a big, setback for the entire telecom sector. So I think, of course, the telecom sector should have also done better in terms of business negotiations, not just depending on the courts, but I think a resolution needs to be found by the government. Otherwise, this whole sector is doomed. Besides, whatever the PSUs will also, banks will also suffer. And nowhere in the world do you have these kind of spectrum charges. Nowhere in the world do you have this kind of compounding interest, which has come onto the telcos. And nowhere in the world has Vodafone failed. So we have to really question, why is it happening in our country and what can the government do for this? Because, everybody can't just palm it off by just saying that, now we are doing it for the consumers and let's, let them go to insolvency. How will the consumer benefit if there are just 2 big players in the market? Will there be enough competition, which was created in the first place when we liberalized telecom in 1999, and we, started with a revenue sharing policy? Are we not regressive in that sense now? So the question is, who is going to bail them out? I think it is going to be a holistic solution with the private telecom players finding some stakeholders, finding a business solution, and not just depending on courts. And at the same time, the government also taking few steps forward and making good whatever setback they have given to the telecom sector.
Mr. Ranina, one final word. But while you said that the companies need to be self-sufficient, the government still can bring in a fresh legislation and announce a telecom package like they did 4 years back. That option is still on the table, right?
Yes, of course. Of course they can do it. But that's a matter of government policy. I have no problem with that. If you feel that it's an important infrastructural sector which needs to be protected, which needs to be nurtured, which needs to be sustained, then certainly they can come up with a package. Let them sit down, let the telecom operators sit down with the government and sort it out. As rightly said, let both come halfway and come to some solution. And they can raise funds from other sources as well. There are just small entrepreneurs that raise funds from private equity funds. They can also go to other sources for raising funds if the telecom sector has so good prospects in India. So I think everybody has to explore revenues, everybody has to put their head together and somehow work out for a solution for the best interest of the Indian consumer.
Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for joining in with your insights.
Okay. And with that, we are absolutely out of time on this edition of Trading Hour on CNBC TV18. Thank you so much from Hormaz, Reema, as well as myself and the team who put the show together. Up next, your halftime report.